Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna go over Flask and I'm going to create a RESTful API that we're gonna connect to PostgresQL. And this is an extra tutorial from my machine learning series. Since we are going to essentially deploy our models in a Flask API in the future, I wanted to show you how you can create a Flask API first. So here we are, and the first thing I'm going to do is to create a virtual environment. So let me go ahead and open the terminal. So when you're in the terminal, go ahead and type this command, python3-m bmb, and the name of the folder of your virtual environment. So I'm just going to type my emb. And as you see, once I click enter, you get this folder in your file tree, which has a bin folder, which has the virtual environment. So now the next step that we have to do is activate the virtual environment. So just type this command. So you essentially just have to navigate to the view folder inside the BNB and then click activate. So we're right here. You can see that we're inside the virtual environment. So now I'm just going to clear the console again. And let me make my terminal a little bit bigger. So now I'm going to type pip list to see what version of pip do I have here. So we can go ahead and install Flask. So type pip install Flask. Now let's clear the console again. I'm gonna type a pip list to see the list of packages installed in my computer, and we have Flask. Now if you want to connect a Postgres database to Flask, you're gonna need this package. So it's called psycop2. Okay, I think I had a typo, sorry about that. So now there you go. It needs to have a G at the end, so let the package install. It might take some time. All right, everything installed. Let me check my pip list. So I just want to make sure I have Flask right here and psycop is installed. So now let's get to the fun part. Go to the file tree and let's create a file. So let's call it app.py, and inside here just bring Flask. So let me close the file tree so you guys have better visuals. So from Flask. And another thing, since you're using Visual Studio Code and your virtual environment, and Visual Studio is not gonna recognize it first, so you first have to tell Visual Studio which version of Python, which is the one from your virtual environment you're using. So go right here to settings or manage, and then go to the command palette, then open the select interpreter, the Python interpreter, and then you have to select the one from your virtual environment, which is this one right here. There you go. Now Visual Studio recognize the module Flask. Now let's create a Flask application. So let's create a variable right here, and then below here you need to call the run function from Flask, and then inside here we're gonna pass the debug mode and then the port. So save the project, and this is the application. It's really easy to create applications with Flask. Let me run the application. So let me go ls, and then I'm gonna click python3 app.py. And we're gonna see that the application is running now. Let me open the file tree. And the next thing that we need to do is we're going to connect our database, or Postgres database. So let me create an extra file right here. So inside here, you need to import psycop. And the first thing that you need to do is you need to specify a string to connect to the database. So let me create this variable connection, and then call psycop right here, and then connect. Call the connect function, and then you're gonna see all that's asking, typical database connection string. So you need to tell the database. Alright, so you have to pass in the database, you need to pass in the local host, you need to pass in the user and the password, and then the port. I don't have a user and a password, so I'm not gonna pass them. So now we need to call in this method, the connection.cursor method. Alright, so now let me call the execute method, and we can essentially run SQL commands. So you need to open 3 strings right here, and then you can run your secret command. So the first one, so let's create a table. So create table. Now we need to specify the data types from the table. So let's pass in the ID, serial, and this is going to be the primary key. Next thing, pass in the name, and we're gonna have a barcode, and then we can pass in description, and then it's gonna be the same, maybe a little, barcode of 100. Yeah, everything's looking good. So now let me execute another command right here. So cur.execute. Alright, so to test the database, let me insert something here. So let's call in name, description, and then we have to specify the values that we're gonna insert. So now let's call it our first name, and then we can just call this description. There. Alright, so now you need to execute the commit command. So calling connection, connection that commit is this method right here. And next you need to close your connection, right? So let's call in the cur command right here and then close the connection. And you need to close the connection as well from the connection. So connection that close. Okay, perfect. So save the document and that should create the database. Let's go back to the terminal right here and then let's execute this script. So call in Python 3 and then the name of the file. So init db the py and okay, I have a typo, sorry about that. So it's not off, it's if. Perfect, the command was executed. So let me check my Postgres database. So let me open another terminal right here. Let me expand everything. So let me type psql Postgres, and then I'm inside my Postgres database. Let's check my tables, and then you're going to see the CRUD tutorial database right here. All right, so if we select everything from the table, we have our first row that we created, the first name and description. So everything's working nice. Let's minimize the file tree and let's keep working on the rest of the application. Now open back the file tree right here. All right, so next I'm gonna create a data model for CRUD. So basically we're just gonna have a node data model. So let me create a folder right here, models, and then inside here let me call a node the py, and then let's create a class called node, and inside below here let's create a constructor, so def. Perfect. So now after cell we're gonna pass 3 attributes. So let's pass in the ID, let's pass in the name, and then let's pass in the description, and then let's call in self that ID, and let's call in self the description. So that's pretty much it. You only have to create a class with a constructor for the node. So save the file. Now we need to create the repository. So let's create another folder right here. So let's call it the repository. And here's where we are going to create the CRUD methods to create nodes, delete nodes, and yeah. So let's call it node repository. So just as before, we're gonna need the database. So import scicop. We're gonna need the data model as well. So from, you have to call in models right here, that node, and then import the node, import node. Next, we need to create the connection to the database. So let's call in def db con scicop right here, and then create a connection. And then here you have to connect again, just as we did in the test before. So let me just grab this string, copy and paste it, and go back, and then you can paste it right here. So it's the same thing, but we're gonna use this method right here. All right, so that's it. All right, so let's create the methods. The first one is gonna be for getting all nodes. So get all nodes. All right, so to create the connection, you have to call in the function right here. All right, next we need to call in the cursor to be able to run SQL commands. Next, let's run a SQL command to get everything. So let's just select everything. Now close it, and then we have to close in the connection. All right, so next you need to call in this method fetch all, which means to fetch everything or just select everything from the CRUD tutorial. And finally, you just need to close the connection as we did before. So let me just grab these two variables right here, current con. Let me fix the indentation for Python right here. Alright, so next, just mapping the data model to the database, and finally return the nodes. Okay, save everything, and that's gonna take care of this method. Alright, so now let's create a method to get the node by ID. So let's define def, and we're gonna pass in a node ID right here. Let's open the method, and then it's gonna be essentially the same. So we have to open the connection. Let me copy those lines right here. Open the connection, then we need to execute a query command. It's not gonna be the same one, but yeah, just this this syntax right here. And then let's change the syntax. Let's select everything from the database where the ID is equal to the ID that we're gonna pass in here. So yeah, that's pretty much the entire thing to it. So then let's call this node data. We have to execute the cur.fetch1 function. Then you need to close in the connections, closing the connections right here, make sure the indentation is correct. And before mapping, we have to do a really quick check if this node exists. So if this node exists, we're gonna return the node. Otherwise, we're going to return null. All right, so essentially we're gonna check if the node exists, we're gonna map it and then return it. Else we're just gonna return null. Okay, so that's going to take care of this method. Let's create the next one. All right, so now I'm going to create a method to create a node. So def create node, and then we're gonna pass in a name and a description. Same as before, we need to open our connection, then we need our database, then we need to run a database query to create a node. Pass in at the end, instead of the node, we have to pass in the name and the description. And then inside the query, we're going to just change everything. This time we need to insert a value, so insert into the database. Let me just grab the name of the database right here. So the values are going to be the name and the description, name and description. Then we have to pass in the values right here, so specify values, and then you need to pass in the values like this, so s, and then okay, so that would take care of this part. Now let's create a new node, so new node ID. Alright, so next, after we create a table, we need to fetch it to return it to the user, and then we can commit everything. So let me enclose the connections. So let me just grab these values right here, close the connections, and before that we need to commit, so connection that commit. Alright, and that's pretty much it. Alright, first we need to return the node, so now let's return the node. Alright, so now let's create the two last ones, so the update node and the delete node. So let's create def update node, and then let's pass in a node ID. We are going to expect, and we're going to have a name and then a description to update it. Description. Alright, so let me grab these values as well. So we're going to have a connection and then the cursor. Next, we need to update everything. So it's going to be pretty similar to this create node. So boom. Alright, so boom, here instead of the, or we're going to need our name or description. And then we also have to pass in the node ID. So node ID. Perfect. Now this query, I'm just gonna delete it completely and I'm not write it from scratch. So let's call in update, grab the database. Alright, so then let's call in update, grab the database, then the set keyword, and then you just have to pass in what you want to update. So first our name, and then let's inject this value right here, and finally put the condition right here where the ID is equal to the ID that we're going to inject. Alright, so this is going to take care of the query. Alright, so finally go right here and commit, close the connection, and that's going to take care of this method right here. So now for deleting the method, it's going to be similar. So let me just rename it, delete node, and we only have to pass in a node ID to delete it. Now we have to do the same, grab the connections. Alright, so now we need to do the same. We have to grab the connections and then the query. Let me put the query right here. So now we don't need, here we don't need the name and the description. Let me delete the query again so we can write it. So let's delete everything from the database. Let me grab the database right here. And then you have to just put the condition right here where the ID is equal to the ID that we're passing. And that's it. So now you just have to commit and close the connections. Commit and close connections and save everything. And this is going to take care of the CRUD operations. Now I'm going to go back to the file tree and I'm going to create a folder called services. And I'm going to do everything like a Spring Boot application. I'm going to separate my layers of the application between three: the repository, the services, and finally the controllers. So yep, let's keep going right here. So next we need to inject the repository here, or just import it. So call in repository, that node repository, and then we have to import all the methods that we have there. So this one. Alright, so 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 5 methods. Perfect. Alright, so the first service is going to be to get all nodes, and I'm doing this because if you want to put some business logic right here, some checks, you would do it in this layer of the application and make your API more modular and scalable. Alright, so we have injected all the methods right here, so we're pretty much done in this layer. Let's go back to the file tree, then let's create the routes layer. So I'm gonna create a folder right here called routes. Then we have to create a file called node route. Okay, so let's close the file tree, and then we're gonna have a few imports. So let's import from Flask. Let's import blueprint. Let's import JSONify, and then we also need the request object right here. Okay, so we're gonna need the service now. So let's import from the service folder. Alright, so from the service folder, import all the methods from service. So make sure that they end up with service. And yeah, that's it here. And the blueprint class here is super useful if you want to make your applications modular in Flask. So yeah, let me create these nodes. Let's call it BP right here, and then call blueprint. And then we're gonna name the blueprint, so it's gonna be just nodes, and then here passing the name. We have to create an annotation here, so nodes. All right, so nodes BP, the route, and then inside here, let's pass in the route. So let's name it API version 1, and then nodes, and then the method. All right, so now let's create the route, get nodes, and finally just return something here. And then before return, we're gonna have let's call the node services. So get all node service, this one right here. All right, so inside this object, let's create our ID. So we have an ID here, ID, and then the node is gonna be equal to node.id. Okay, so finally we need to serialize everything to JSON. So call the method JSON file and then pass in your object. So let me just put this here and then call it nodes, and then passing the nodes list. That's pretty much it. Let me save the file. All right, so now that we're done here, let's go back to the root of the application, and then let's import the routes. So from routes, calling the nodes route, and then import our nodes BP. Now we need to inject this here. So calling the app object here, and then register blueprint, calling the register blueprint method, and then inject your nodes and then inject your nodes BP right here. All right, so now your methods and routes are linked to your Flask application. All right, so now let's test everything, and then we can continue with the rest of the methods. All right, so now let's test the application. So let's call in Python 3 and app.py. All right, everything seems to be working fine. So I guess we can go to Postman and check this URL to see if it's working fine. All right, so now I'm here in Postman. Let's open a new tab, and here just paste the location of your application. My application is running in the port 5000. It's API v1 nodes, and then let's run the query to see if it's working. And yeah, it's working. It's fetching the first object from the database, the first node that we created at the beginning of the tutorial. So all right, so now let's do a post method here. So let me copy and paste this part right here, and then just change here this to post, and then let's just change the name to create node route, create node route. All right, perfect. Okay, so this method is a little different. So we have to specify a variable right here. Then we have to grab a request object and then call the method getJSON from the request object. So that would be the first step. Then we need to grab in the data from the request object. So pretty much the name is going to be the name, and so pretty much it's going to be the name and the description. So that comes from here, from the data. Get everything, get the name, and get the name, and then you're gonna do the same for the description. So here data, the get, and then grab the description. Now let's do a check right here. If not name or not description, we're gonna have an error here. So return JSON file, and then let's send it. Let's send the JSON object here. Then a 400 response, and then we can put a message inside here. So error, and then let's send name and description require name. All right, so if the user password check, we can just create the new node. So calling the create node service, and then passing the name and the description from the object. So name, description, and finally we can return our node as a JSON object, and then a message telling the user everything went okay. So message right here, and then node created successfully, node. All right, so that would be pretty much it for the create method. So let's go ahead and create the next one. Okay, so let's create the route to grab or node by ID. So copy and paste this part right here, and it's pretty much the same here. So let me just change back to the get, and after the nodes we're gonna have a slash here, and then we have to pass in our ID. So, and that would be it here. Now let's create our method. All right, so now let's create a node. Let's call in the node by ID service, get node by ID service, and then we can pass the node ID here, and then we have to do a little check. So if we have a node, we're going to return a JSON object of success, or if we don't have a node, we're gonna return a error message. All right, so now let's grab the node ID, Or so if we have a node in the database, let's just send a node as a JSON object here. And if we don't have a node, let's send a error message. So let's just change this to 404, and then let's call not node found. Alright, so we have 2 routes to go, so let me copy and paste this part again. Alright, and below here we're going to create the update route. So this is going to be a put method, and it's going to be exactly the same. So we don't have to change this part. So let's grab this part in here and then just call this update node. We're going to pass the ID as well. It's going to be very similar to this one right here. So let me grab those methods right here. Let me grab that code here, and then we have to paste it. We need to pass in the name, the description, whatever you want to update. All right, so now we're gonna have the same check right here. So if we don't have a name or a description, let's just send our error message. And now we need to call in our method for updating. So let me call this existing node. All right, so now we need to grab the node that we're going to update. So let's call in our get node by ID. All right, so get node by ID service, this one right here, and then pass in the ID here. All right, so now let's do a little check right here. So if we have an existing node, we're gonna call our update node service, and then pass in the node ID. We have to pass in the node ID and then the name and then also the description. All right, so if we have an error, let's send an error message right here. So not found. And now let's create the route for deleting a node. Let's pass in the node ID. Now we need to call in an existing node first. So we have to call in existing node here. So let's use our get node by ID service here, and then pass in the node ID. And then you have to check if we have an existing node. If we have an existing node, let's delete the node. So let's call in the node delete node service, and then pass in the node ID. Then we're gonna send a successful message. Else, we're gonna send a return. We're gonna return an error here. So let me just return the same error as before. Let me fix the indentation right here. Okay, and this is going to take care of the last route. So let me save the changes. Let me go back to the beginning of the application. I'm going to just go right here. Let me close everything, and then I'm going to restore the Flask server. So let's run the server again. Everything's running. So let's go back to Postman and test the methods. Okay, so we're in Postman. So I'm gonna create my post method first. So let me just copy and paste the route. Let's go to body, go to raw right here. Let me open square brackets. Specify name right here. We need a name and a description, so just name it first node, then the description, just send it like that, then send the node, and you're gonna see node successfully created. And yep, everything's working here. So now let's update this node. So let me just grab this URL. Let's go and open a new tab here. Let's put a put here. So now let me open a body again. All right, so let me go back here. You need to copy the name and the description too. So let's put some random text right here. So let me now we need to okay, let me go back here. It's the number 8. So number 8. All right, so let's update this node, and node updated successfully. Let me grab the nodes in my. All right, so we have this node, and we have the description right here first and the name. Everything was updated successfully. Let me create another node. Another node right here. Let's send the node right here. You can see everything's working. So now let me just grab this part. Let me go back to let's test the get by ID method. So 8. You can grab one node by the ID. Now let's test the delete URL. So let's go right here to delete, and then boom, node deleted. Let's go check to all my nodes to see if everything was deleted. It's this one, right? Yeah. So now you see that the node was deleted. Alright, so that was it. Thank you for watching. The code is going to be in my GitHub, and see you the next time.